Let me first ask this question. Did any bank you surveyed not participate by returning the survey?
No, we had 100% participation.
All right, very good. Should we pass legislation to require the tracking of TARP funds, since evidently it was not required in the actual providing of the TARP monies?
We believe that requiring recipients to account for their use of funds is a fundamentally important part of transparency. It's why we make this recommendation, continue to make this recommendation. As a policy, we tend not to cross into the policy recommendations as to what Congress should do or what Treasury should do. We do say what Treasury should do, but we don't suggest legislation for Congress just as a policy matter and to maintain our independence. But we certainly do feel it is our obligation to present to you why we think it's such an important factor of transparency.
Now, did the contracts that the Treasury devised with the banks for the distribution of the TARP funds prohibit the use of the money for any purpose?
Different contracts and different programs. There are some restrictions on stock buybacks, on in the capital purchase program, on certain restrictions on increasing the level of dividends. So there are some restrictions, although not many.
So the fact that they would use the money to make investments, repay debts, or buy other banks was all legal under the granting of the TARP funds?
Absolutely.
All right. Should we change that?
That is as I said, that is a real policy decision that needs to get made. I think in making that decision, we should take a look at both sides of these arguments. And part of the role of transparency as a Special Inspector General is that we think that these debates are best informed by bringing transparency so we can see what happened. But I can give you arguments that I've heard on both sides of any one of these issues, including, I think one of the more controversial is acquisitions. And I've heard some very powerful, strong arguments that that's actually good for the banking system, and arguments on the other side that it would be an inappropriate use of TARP funds.
Let's talk about acquisitions. Which banks actually took the TARP money and made acquisitions?
We're going to be publishing necessarily in some redacted form each of the responses that we received. And the reason why I say redacted is that there's some confidential business information that we'd be prohibited by law from making public. Since we're still in the process of that, I'm reluctant to comment on any specific response that we had. We will be making that information public, hopefully within the next 30 days.
And in terms of alarms that go off in your head because of what you have been able to ascertain through your surveys, what are those alarms that we should be particularly focused on?
I don't think that there's any alarming, because I think when we did this survey, we're taking great care not to make any judgments for all the reasons that I've stated. The most alarming thing to me is that Treasury continues to refuse to adopt this recommendation, even in light of the proof that we now have in this audit. They continue to tell us that it is a meaningless survey, even though no one from Treasury has taken us up on our offer to come look at these survey responses, an unredacted form. We said, come over, take a look at them, and see if you think that these are meaningless responses that can't provide transparency. So I think the most alarming to me is this steadfast refusal, this willful refusal to adopt a recommendation that we think is so important to provide transparency.
So you're saying that even though you now have over 360 surveys that provide information on how the TARP funds have been used, no one from the Treasury Department has come over to look at this information?
No, their refusal to adopt our recommendation was made purely off of our audit report. They have not come over.
I think that's astonishing. Are you, Black?